The red rocks of the frontier stood like ancient sentinels against the pale dawn sky, their jagged edges catching the first light of another unforgiving day. Wind howled through the canyon passes, carrying with it the eternal dust that settled thick upon everything it touched: fence posts, water troughs, and the weathered boards of Clara Mitchell's ranch house. The grit worked its way into every crevice, a constant reminder of the harsh land that both sustained and punished those brave enough to call it home. Clara woke to the familiar chill that seeped through the thin walls of her bedroom. October mornings in the Arizona Territory bit deep, especially when a body had only threadbare quilts and dying embers in the hearth for comfort. She lay still for a moment, listening to the wind rattle the loose shutter on the north window, the one Thomas had promised to fix before he'd gone to work that last shift in the copper mine 3 years ago. Rising from her narrow bed, she wrapped a wool shawl around her shoulders and padded to the kitchen in her bare feet. The floorboards creaked their morning protest, each sound echoing through the empty house. She'd grown accustomed to the solitude, or so she told herself, though the silence still pressed against her ears like cotton. The coffee pot sat cold on the stove, last night's grounds still in it. She dumped them out the back door, watching the dark sludge stain the frost-touched earth. As she pumped fresh water from the well, her eyes swept across her land, 40 acres of stubborn soil that fought her every attempt at cultivation. The cattle pen held 6 head now, down from 20 when Thomas was alive. They stood huddled together against the wind, their ribs showing through patchy hides. "Morning, ladies," she called to them, her voice cracking from disuse. The lead cow, a stringy longhorn she'd named Patience, lifted her head and lowed mournfully. "I know. Feed's getting scarce. We'll make do." She scattered what hay she had, watching the animals jostle weakly for position. The drought had been hard on everyone, but a woman alone faced challenges the married folks couldn't fathom. No man to help with the heavy lifting, no strong back to repair fences or dig new wells. Just Clara and her stubborn refusal to sell out to Earl Watson, who'd been circling her land like a vulture since the day they'd lowered Thomas into the ground. Back inside, she built up the fire and set the coffee to boil. While she waited, she pulled out her mending basket, examining a tear in her work dress. Her fingers, once soft from a life in St. Louis before she'd married Thomas and headed west, were now rough as saddle leather. She threaded her needle and began the careful stitches, each one precise despite the tremor that sometimes took her hands on cold morning. The coffee's bitter aroma filled the kitchen, and she poured herself a cup, adding a precious spoonful of sugar from her dwindling supply. She'd need to make the trip to Whisper Creek soon for provisions, though the thought made her stomach clench. The townspeople's stares had grown heavier these past months, their whispers following her through Hutchinson's general store like tumbleweeds. "That's the Mitchell widow," they'd murmur, not bothering to lower their voices enough. 3 years now, and no children. What kind of woman?" The words echoed in her mind as she sipped her coffee. She had heat but no air. That's what Martha Hutchinson had said last month, thinking Clara was out of earshot. The phrase had burrowed under her skin like a splinter, festering there, as if her worth as a woman could be measured only in the children she could or couldn't produce. She'd wanted children. Lord knew she'd wanted them. Those first months with Thomas had been full of hope, each missed monthly bringing joy that turned to disappointment soon enough. They'd tried. She'd drunk the foul-tasting teas the Mexican curandera had prescribed, had followed every piece of advice from well-meaning neighbor women, but her womb remained empty, month after month, year after year. After Thomas died, the doctor from Tucson had examined her during one of his rare visits to Whisper Creek. Dr. Morrison, with his cold hands and colder manner, had pronounced her unlikely to conceive due to some internal failing he couldn't quite specify. The verdict had spread through town faster than wildfire, adding another layer to her status as an oddity, a young widow who couldn't fulfill a woman's most basic purpose. Clara set down her cup and moved to the window, watching the sun climb higher over the mesa. 31 years old and already written off by society. In St. Louis, she might have remarried by now, might have found a widower with children who needed a mother. But here in the territory, eligible men were scarce, and those who were available wanted young brides who could give them sons to work the land. She thought of Thomas, of his gentle hands and easy laugh. He'd never blamed her for their childlessness, had held her through the tears and disappointments. "We got each other. Clara, girl," he'd say, kissing her forehead. "That's more than most folks can claim." But Thomas was gone, crushed beneath 1,000 tons of rock when the mine shaft collapsed, leaving her with nothing but memories and 40 acres of ornery land. The morning passed in chores, mucking out the chicken coop, checking the fence line for breaks, hauling water for the vegetable garden that struggled to produce more than stunted carrots and bitter lettuce. By noon, the wind had picked up, driving sand against her face as she worked. She tied her bonnet tighter, squinting against the assault. As she wrestled with a loose fence post, she spotted a rider on the horizon. Her hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped against the fence, though she relaxed when she recognized Jake Morrison from the Double Bar Ranch. He tipped his hat as he approached, his horse dancing nervously in the wind. "Morning, Mrs. Mitchell?" he called, having to raise his voice above the howling. "Storm coming in from the north? Big one, by the look of it. You got everything battened down?" "I'll manage," she replied, neither friendly nor hostile. Jake was one of the few who still treated her with basic courtesy, though she suspected that had more to do with his mother's Christian charity teachings than any real regard for her. "Watson's been asking about your water rights again," Jake continued, his young face troubled. "Thought you should know he's been talking to Judge Harper about some legal nonsense." Clara's jaw tightened. "Let him talk. This land is mine free and clear." "Yes, ma'am. Just thought—" He trailed off, uncomfortable. "You need anything from town? I'm heading in tomorrow." "I'm fine," she lied. She was low on flour and coffee, nearly out of ammunition for the rifle, but she'd make do rather than be beholden to anyone. Jake nodded and wheeled his horse around. "You take care, Mrs. Mitchell. That storm looks to be a bad one." She watched him ride off, dust devils swirling in his wake. The sky to the north had indeed darkened, clouds piling up like a mountain range of shadow. The air had taken on that peculiar heaviness that preceded the worst weather, making it hard to draw a full breath. By evening, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Clara brought the chickens into the barn and gave the cattle extra hay, knowing they'd need the energy to weather what was coming. She filled every bucket and pot with water, stacked firewood by the door, and checked the shutters twice. As she prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, she found herself talking aloud, a habit she'd developed to push back the silence. "Storm coming. Thomas, remember that big one in 91? You said it sounded like the devil himself was trying to blow the house down." She paused, listening to the wind pick up outside. "Feels like that kind of night." The first spatters of rain hit just as she finished eating. Within minutes, it had become a deluge, hammering against the roof like bullets. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark, terrifying detail before plunging it back into darkness. Thunder followed close behind, shaking the walls. Clara lit every lamp she had, creating pools of warm light to hold back the dark. She pulled her rocking chair close to the stove and took up her mending again, trying to focus on the needle's movement rather than the storm's fury. But her hands shook now, and not from the cold. She was utterly alone. If the roof gave way, if the floodwaters rose, if lightning struck, there was no one to help. No one who would even know for days if something happened to her. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles off, and in weather like this, it might as well be 50. "You're being foolish," she told herself sternly. "You've weathered storms before." But tonight felt different. Tonight, the weight of her isolation pressed down like a physical thing. She was a woman with heat, but no air, with land but no family, with strength but no purpose beyond mere survival. The storm outside seemed to echo the tempest in her heart, wild, destructive, and ultimately meaningless. She set aside her mending and moved to the window, peering out through the rain-lashed glass. Lightning illuminated the yard in stuttering glimpses. The barn, the well, the fence posts bent nearly horizontal in the wind. And there, at the edge of her vision, something else, a shape that didn't belong. Clara blinked, wiping condensation from the glass. The next lightning flash showed nothing unusual, but unease prickled along her spine. She reached for the rifle, checking that it was loaded, then returned to her chair. The storm would pass, as all storms did. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. It always did. But tonight, she would endure, as she had endured everything else fate had thrown at her. The wind howled its lonely song, and Clara Mitchell, widow, rancher, and woman without heir, settled in to wait for dawn. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind an eerie calm that settled over the desert like a shroud. Clara woke to find the world transformed. What little vegetation existed was beaten flat, and pools of muddy water collected in every depression. But it was the sky that made her pause at the kitchen window, coffee cup halfway to her lips. Instead of the clear blue she expected after a storm, it had turned a sickly yellow-brown, like old brass tarnished by time. Sandstorm, she muttered, recognizing the signs. The rain had been just the opening act. Now came the main performance. She hurried outside to secure what she could. The chickens squawked in protest as she herded them back into the coop, and she double-checked the barn doors. The cattle, still huddled together, seemed to sense what was coming. They lowed nervously, eyes rolling white at the edges. The wind started as a whisper, then built to a moan, then to a shriek that set her teeth on edge. The horizon disappeared behind a wall of dust that advanced across the desert like an army. Clara had seen sandstorms before, but this one looked angrier than most. A towering wall of brown fury that swallowed everything in its path. She was running for the house when she saw him. At first, she thought it was a trick of the wind-driven dust, a shadow where no shadow should be. But as she squinted through the haze, the shape resolved into something unmistakably human. A man, stumbling, one hand pressed to his side, the other reaching out as if grasping for something solid in the chaos. He collapsed 20 feet from her well. Clara stood frozen for a heartbeat, her mind racing. A stranger on her land, in the middle of a sandstorm, clearly injured. Every instinct Thomas had drummed into her screamed danger, but the Christian charity her mother had taught her won out. She couldn't leave him to be buried by the storm. She pulled her shawl up over her nose and mouth and fought her way to where he lay. The wind tried to knock her down, sand stinging every exposed inch of skin. The man was face down in the dirt, unconscious or close to it. His coat was torn across the back, and she could see blood seeping through his shirt at the shoulder. Grunting with effort, she managed to roll him onto his back. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35, with dark hair matted with blood and dust. His face was angular, weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of stubble. Even unconscious, there was something wild about him, something that spoke of hard living and harder choices. The storm was almost upon them. She could see individual sand devils dancing at its leading edge, whirling columns of dust that rose and fell like demonic spirits. There was no time to think, only to act. Clara grabbed the stranger under his arms and began dragging him toward the barn. He was heavier than he looked, all lean muscle and dead weight. Her back screamed in protest, and she had to stop twice to readjust her grip. The wind fought her every step, trying to tear him from her grasp, trying to knock her to her knees. By the time she got him into the old horse stall at the back of the barn, her arms felt like they might fall off. She collapsed beside him, gasping for breath through the fabric of her shawl. Outside, the storm hit with full force, turning day to night. The barn walls groaned under the assault, and streams of sand poured through every crack and gap. Clara forced herself to move. She lit the lantern she kept in the barn, its warm glow pushing back the darkness. In its light, she could see the stranger more clearly. His shoulder was definitely wounded. A dark stain spread across his shirt, too round and neat to be anything but a bullet hole. Shot. He'd been shot. Her hand stilled for a moment as the implication sank in. Men didn't get shot for no reason out here. He could be an outlaw, a horse thief, a killer. He could bring trouble to her door that she couldn't afford. But he was also hurt and helpless, and leaving him to die went against everything she'd been raised to believe. With a sigh, she went to work. She fetched her medical supplies from the house, fighting the wind both ways. The sandstorm had turned the 50-yard journey into an odyssey. By the time she returned to the barn, she was coughing and spitting mud, her eyes streaming tears. The stranger hadn't moved. She knelt beside him and carefully cut away his shirt with her sewing scissors. The bullet had passed through the meat of his shoulder, leaving an ugly wound but missing anything vital. She'd seen worse injuries on the ranch. Men gored by bulls, trampled by horses, torn up by barbed wire. She cleaned the wound as best she could with carbolic and water, then packed it with clean cloth. Her hands were steady now, focused on the task. She'd done this for Thomas more than once, patched him up after various mishaps. The familiar actions calmed her nerves. As she worked, she studied the stranger's face, even unconscious and covered in dust. There was something compelling about his features. A thin scar ran through his left eyebrow, and his hands, she noticed, were calloused in the way of a man who worked with horses and guns. She was wrapping the bandage around his shoulder when his eyes flew open. They were dark, almost black in the lantern light, and wild with pain and confusion. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "Easy," she said, trying to keep her voice calm though her heart hammered against her ribs. "You're hurt. I'm trying to help." His gaze darted around the barn, taking in his surroundings with the quick assessment of a hunted animal. Then his eyes found hers again, and something in them shifted. The wildness faded slightly, replaced by a wariness that was somehow more unsettling. "Where?" His voice was barely a whisper, rough as sandpaper. "My ranch, about 15 miles south of Whisper Creek." She gently tried to free her wrist, but his grip didn't loosen. "You collapsed by my well. There's a sandstorm." As if to emphasize her words, the wind howled louder, and something crashed against the barn wall. The stranger flinched, then groaned as the movement pulled at his wound. "Need to move," he gasped. "They're coming. Who's coming? Who shot you?" But his eyes had rolled back, and he slumped into unconsciousness again. This time, his grip on her wrist loosened, and she was able to pull free. She sat back on her heels, mind racing. "They're coming." The words sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the storm. Whatever trouble this man was running from, she just brought it to her doorstep. But what choice did she have? The storm would rage for hours yet. She couldn't move him, couldn't get to town for help. She was trapped here with an injured stranger who might be an outlaw, waiting for unknown pursuers who might be worse. Clara finished bandaging his shoulder, then covered him with an old horse blanket. She'd done what she could for now. The rest was in God's hands. She settled herself on a hay bale where she could watch both the stranger and the barn door. Her rifle lay across her lap, loaded and ready. Outside, the storm raged on, turning the world into a howling chaos of wind and sand. But inside the barn, in the small circle of lantern light, and strange quiet descended. The stranger stirred occasionally, muttering words she couldn't make out. Once, he called out a name, "Samuel," with such anguish that it made her chest tight. Whatever had brought him here, whatever he was running from, it had marked him deep. As the hours crawled by, Clara found herself studying him more closely. His clothes, though torn and travel-stained, were of good quality. His boots were well made, the kind that cost more than she'd see in a year. Not a common drifter. Then, his gun belt was empty, the holster worn smooth from use. Who was he? What had he done to earn a bullet in the shoulder? And who were they? The ones he claimed were coming. The questions circled in her mind like buzzards, but no answers came. All she could do was wait and watch and hope that when the storm cleared, it wouldn't bring more trouble than she could handle. Near midnight, the wind began to ease. The constant barrage of sand against the walls lessened to an occasional patter. Clara's eyes burned with exhaustion, but she didn't dare sleep. The stranger could wake again, could be dangerous, or his pursuers could arrive, following his trail despite the storm. She thought of her quiet life, her daily struggles with the land and loneliness. It wasn't much of a life, perhaps, but it was hers. She'd built it from the ashes of her dreams, carved it out of the unforgiving desert with her own 2 hands. Now this stranger threatened to destroy even that small victory. "Should have left you in the dust," she told his unconscious form. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Whatever came next, she'd done the right thing. Her mother would have been proud. Thomas would have done the same. The lantern flickered, running low on oil. Clara refilled it from the can she kept in the barn, then resumed her vigil. Somewhere in the darkness, danger might be approaching, but for now, in this small space carved out of the storm, she would stand guard over the wounded stranger who had literally fallen into her life. The wind continued to die, and stars began to appear through the gaps in the barn walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions. But tonight, she would keep watch, her rifle ready, her resolve steady despite the uncertainty that had blown in with the sandstorm. The stranger woke properly just before dawn, when the desert cold bit deepest and the stars were beginning to fade in the eastern sky. Clara had dozed fitfully on her hay bale, jerking awake every time the wind rattled the barn door or a coyote howled in the distance. She was instantly alert when she heard him stir, her hand tightening on the rifle. "Water," he croaked, trying to push himself up on his good arm. "Stay still," she commanded, setting the rifle aside but keeping it within reach. She fetched the canteen she'd brought from the house and helped him drink. Supporting his head with one hand, he swallowed greedily, then coughed, wincing at the pain it caused. "Thank you," he managed, his dark eyes finding hers in the lantern light. Up close, she could see they weren't black as she'd first thought, but a deep brown flecked with gold, like nuggets in a stream bed. "What's your name?" she asked, settling back on her heels. He hesitated, and she saw calculation flicker across his face. "Jesse," he said finally. "Jesse Calhoun." "Well, Mr. Calhoun, you've been shot. Do you remember what happened?" Another pause. Longer this time. "There was a disagreement. About a horse?" Clara almost laughed at the obvious lie. "Must have been some horse." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "Arabian mare, worth her weight in gold, or so her owner claimed. And did you steal her?" "No, ma'am, I was trying to return her." This time Clara did laugh, a short, bitter sound. "Of course you were, and I suppose those men chasing you are just eager to thank you for your good deed?" Jesse's expression darkened. "Those men are bounty hunters. They don't much care about truth, just the reward money. And is there a bounty on your head?" He met her gaze steadily. "There is, though not for any crime I actually committed." Clara studied him, trying to read the truth in his weathered face. Every outlaw claimed innocence. Thomas had told her once. But something about this man, maybe it was the steadiness of his gaze, or the way he'd said Samuel's name in his delirium, made her want to believe him. "I need to check your wound," she said, choosing to sidestep the question of his guilt or innocence for now. "It'll hurt. Can't hurt worse than it does now," he said, but his jaw tightened as she unwrapped the bandage. The wound looked better than she'd feared. No signs of infection yet, though it was too early to be sure. She cleaned it again, aware of how he controlled his breathing, how his hands clenched into fists with each touch of the carbolic. "You've done this before," he observed, watching her work. "Ranch life teaches you many skills," she replied, concentrating on rewrapping the bandage. "My husband used to say I could have been a doctor, if they let women do such things." "Your husband? Dead. 3 years now. I'm sorry." She shrugged, a gesture meant to convey indifference she didn't feel. "The desert takes what it wants. We just try to survive what's left." When she finished with the bandage, she sat back and really looked at him, despite the pain and exhaustion evident in every line of his body. There was an alertness to him, a coiled readiness that spoke of a man used to danger. "You can't stay here," she said bluntly. "Soon as you're able to ride, you need to move on." "I know." He tried to sit up straighter, grimaced, and gave up. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door. Soon as this storm passes—" "It has passed. Been quiet for the last 2 hours." He looked toward the barn door, where pale light was beginning to seep through the cracks. "Then I should go. You can't even sit up, much less ride. And you don't have a horse, unless it's wandering around out there somewhere." She ran off when the shooting started. Smart animal. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Why did you help me? You don't know me. I could be everything those bounty hunters say I am." Clara considered the question, looking at her work-roughened hands. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone and in need. Maybe because I was raised to help folks when I could. Or maybe I'm just a fool." "You're no fool," he said softly. "I can see that much." Something in his tone made her look up, and their eyes met and held. The barn suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Clara became acutely aware of how long it had been since she'd been alone with a man who wasn't her husband, how his presence seemed to fill the space in a way that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. She stood abruptly, breaking the moment. "I'll get you some food. You need to build your strength if you're going to travel." In the house, she leaned against the kitchen counter and took several deep breaths. What was she doing? Harboring a wounded outlaw, or alleged outlaw, nursing him back to health like some character in a dime novel. The sensible thing would be to ride to town, tell Sheriff Watson where to find him, collect any reward, and go back to her quiet, lonely life. But she knew she wouldn't. Something about Jesse Calhoun had caught her, some quality she couldn't name. Maybe it was the way he'd tried to protect her even while half dead, warning about his pursuers. Maybe it was the pain in his voice when he'd called out in his sleep. Or maybe she was just so starved for human company that even a wounded outlaw seemed like a gift from Providence. She prepared a simple breakfast, biscuits left over from yesterday, some dried beef, and strong coffee. Loading it onto a tray, she added a bottle of whiskey from Thomas's hidden stash. For the pain, she told herself. When she returned to the barn, Jesse had managed to prop himself up against the wall. Sweat beaded his forehead from the effort, but he gave her a crooked smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, less dangerous. "Smells like heaven," he said as she set the tray down. "It's not much. Supplies are low. I was planning a trip to town before the storm hit. After what I've been eating on the trail, this is a feast." She helped him with the coffee, holding the cup steady when his hands shook. He ate slowly, carefully, like a man who'd learned not to take food for granted, between bites. She found herself asking questions, drawn by curiosity she couldn't quite suppress. "Where are you from?" "Originally? Virginia, but I've been moving west for years now. Texas, New Mexico, now Arizona territory. Running from something?" His smile was rueful. "More like running to something, though I'm not sure what anymore. Had a notion once about starting fresh, maybe finding some land, raising horses. Foolish dreams. Why foolish? Plenty of men have done it. Those men didn't have prices on their heads." Clara poured a measure of whiskey into his coffee. What really happened? With the horse, I mean, Jesse was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, meant for the confessional darkness of the barn. "I was working for a rancher named Morrison down near Tucson. Good job. Honest work. His daughter took a fancy to me, pretty girl, spirited. I tried to keep things proper, but she was persistent. Her father found us talking in the stable one evening. Nothing improper, just talking. But he'd been drinking, and he had plans for her to marry some banker's son." He paused to take another sip of the fortified coffee. "Morrison accused me of trying to compromise his daughter, ruin her reputation. When I denied it, he accused me of stealing that Arabian mare. Had his foreman swear he'd seen me do it. Judge was Morrison's poker buddy. I was convicted before the trial even started." "So you ran." "So I ran. Been running for 6 months now. The bounty keeps going up. Morrison's got deep pockets and a deeper grudge. Clara studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but his eyes remained steady on hers, and something in her gut told her he was telling the truth. She'd known men like Morrison, wealthy, powerful, used to getting their way. Thomas had tangled with one once over water rights, and it had nearly cost them everything. And the daughter? Did she speak for you? A shadow crossed Jessie's face. Her father sent her back east before the trial. Heard she married that banker's son after all. They sat in silence for a moment, the barn growing warmer as the sun climbed higher. Through the gaps in the walls, Clara could see the desert coming alive, lizards venturing out onto sun-warmed rocks, a roadrunner pecking at something in the dust. I should check on the animals, she said, suddenly needing distance from the intimacy of shared stories. Will you be all right for a bit? I'm not going anywhere, he assured her, gesturing to his shoulder. Though, if you have any more of that whiskey. She left the bottle within reach and stepped out into the morning. The storm had scoured the air clean, leaving everything sharp-edged and crystal clear. Her cattle stood in their pen, looking none the worse for wear, and the chickens clucked irritably as she scattered feed. As she worked, her mind kept returning to the barn, to the wounded man with his dangerous past and uncertain future. She thought of the bounty hunters he'd mentioned, probably tracking him even now. How long before they arrived? How long before her quiet life exploded into violence? The rational part of her knew she should be afraid. But another part, a part she'd thought dead since Thomas died, felt strangely alive. For 3 years she'd existed in a kind of twilight, going through the motions of living without really feeling anything. Now, with danger literally lying in her barn, she felt her blood moving again, her heart beating with something more than mere function. You're a fool, Clara Mitchell, she told herself, pumping water for the cattle. A lonely, foolish woman who's let a pretty face and a sad story turn your head. But even as she said it, she knew it was more than that. It was the way he'd thanked her for the water, sincere and without servility. It was the pain in his voice when he talked about his lost dreams. It was the careful way he'd watched her, as if she were something precious and unexpected. The sun climbed higher, and the heat began to build. Soon it would be too hot to do much of anything but seek shade and wait for evening. She finished her chores and returned to the barn, where she found Jessie sleeping again, the empty whiskey bottle beside him. She settled onto her hay bale and picked up her mending, content for now to watch over him while he slept. The day stretched ahead, full of uncertainty and danger, but for this moment, in the quiet barn with dust motes dancing in the sunbeams, she felt an odd peace. Whatever came next, she'd face it. She'd survived worse, after all, and maybe, just maybe, this stranger who'd blown in with the storm might bring something more than trouble to her door. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, she found herself almost hoping it was true. The sound came with the noon heat, horses, multiple riders, moving fast. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard them, the drumming of hooves carrying clear across the desert silence. Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. She ran to the window, peering out carefully from behind the faded curtain. 3 men, dust-covered and hard-faced, were approaching from the north. Even at a distance, she could see the rifles in their saddle scabbards, the practiced way they scanned the terrain. Bounty hunters, sure as sunrise, moving quickly but quietly. She grabbed her rifle and slipped out the back door. The barn was 50 yards away, 50 yards of open ground where they'd spot her for certain. But Jessie was there, helpless and unaware. She had to warn him. She made it halfway before one of the riders saw her. He shouted to his companions, and they spurred their horses toward the ranch house. Clara abandoned stealth and ran, her boots slipping in the loose sand, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She burst into the barn to find Jessie already alert, struggling to stand. His face had gone pale beneath his tan, and fresh blood seeped through the bandage on his shoulder. "They're here," she gasped. "3 of them. My gun. You don't have one, remember? She moved to the barn door, peering out through a crack. The riders had dismounted near her house, weapons drawn. They're searching the house first. We have minutes, maybe less. Jesse had managed to get to his feet, leaning heavily against the wall. There's a hayloft? Yes, but you can't climb. Not me. You. His eyes were fierce despite his weakness. Get up there with your rifle. I'll handle them down here. With what? You can barely stand. I'll manage. Go! The command in his voice surprised her, but she found herself obeying. She scrambled up the ladder to the loft, rifle in hand, just as the barn door creaked open. Well, the voice was gravelly, amused. Jesse Calhoun, you've led us a merry chase, boy. Through gaps in the floorboards, Clara could see 3 men spreading out in the barn below. The speaker was older, grizzled, with cold gray eyes beneath a battered hat. The other 2 were younger, hungry-looking, hands hovering near their guns. Jesse stood straight despite what it must have cost him, meeting their gazes without flinching. Pike should have known Morrison would send his best dog. Pike chuckled, a sound like stones grinding. Now, that's no way to talk to an old friend. Though I guess we ain't exactly friends, are we? Not after that business in Amarillo. That was self-defense and you know it. Judge didn't see it that way. Course, you weren't there to give your side. Were you? Too busy running? Pike took a step closer, and Clara sighted down her rifle, drawing a bead on his chest. Morrison upped the bounty. You know, $500. That's a lot of money for one broken-down horse thief. I didn't steal anything. Sure you didn't, just like you didn't compromise his little girl. Pike's grin was ugly, though between you and me, I'd have been tempted too. Pretty little thing, all that yellow hair and those big blue eyes. Jesse's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. What do you want, Pike? Well now, that's the question, isn't it? See, Morrison wants you alive. Wants to see you hang personal-like. But alive is a flexible term. You could be missing a few pieces and still be breathing. One of the younger men laughed. A nervous sound. Come on, Pike. Let's just take him and go. This place gives me the creeps. Shut up, Donovan. Pike never took his eyes off Jesse. I'm curious about something. Calhoun, how'd you survive that storm? Man on foot, wounded, middle of nowhere. Yet here you are, bandaged up neat as you please. Someone's been playing Good Samaritan. Clara's heart hammered so loud she was sure they'd hear it. Jesse kept his expression neutral, but she saw his jaw tighten. Found an abandoned line shack, he said. Patched myself up. That's so? Pike looked around the barn with theatrical interest. Funny thing is, this don't look abandoned to me. Looks like someone's been taking real good care of the place. Woman's touch, I'd say. You wouldn't be putting some poor widow in danger, would you? Jesse? There's no one here but me. Now, see, that's what I thought you'd say. Pike nodded to his men. Donovan, check the house again. Thorough this time. Baker, search the barn. Clara held her breath as Baker began poking through the stalls below. He was directly beneath her now, kicking at hay bales, peering into corners. A board creaked under her weight, and he paused, looking up. Pike, he called. I think Jesse moved faster than a wounded man had any right to. He grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the wall and swung it like a club, catching Baker across the shoulders. The man went down hard, his gun skittering across the floor. Pike's gun was out in an instant, pointed at Jesse's chest. That was stupid, boy. Let him go. Clara's voice rang out clear and strong. She stood at the edge of the loft, rifle trained on Pike. Drop your weapons, all of you. Pike looked up at her, and his ugly grin widened. Well, hello there. Pretty lady. Should have known Jesse would find himself a soft-hearted woman. They always were his weakness. I said drop them. Or what? You'll shoot me? Pike laughed. You ever killed a man, sweetheart? It ain't as easy as you might think. The way the blood... Clara fired. the bullet kicking up dust an inch from Pike's boot. Her hands were steady as she worked the lever, chambering another round. The next one goes in your knee, then the other knee. I may not have killed a man, Mr. Pike, but I've put down plenty of rabid animals. I suspect it's much the same. Pike's grin faded. He studied her for a long moment, then slowly holstered his gun. All right, lady. You've got sand. I'll give you that. But you're making a mistake. This man's a criminal. There's paper on him, legal and proper. Legal doesn't always mean right. Clara replied, Now drop your gun belt. You too, she added to Baker, who was groaning on the floor. They complied, Pike moving with exaggerated care. Jesse collected their weapons, though the effort left him swaying on his feet. You can't watch us forever, Pike said, his voice gone cold and flat. We'll be back, with more men, and when we come, we won't be so polite. You're harboring a fugitive, lady. That makes you a criminal, too. Then I guess I'll hang right alongside him. Clara said, Now get out. Take your friend and go. Pike helped Baker to his feet. The younger man was clutching his ribs, face twisted in pain. They moved toward the door, Pike pausing at the threshold. This ain't over. Calhoun, you know that, right? Morrison won't stop. Neither will I. I know, Jesse said quietly. But it's over for today. They heard Donovan shouting from outside, asking what was happening. Pike called back that they were coming, then gave Clara one last look. You're going to regret this, lady. Mark my words. Then they were gone, mounting their horses and riding away. Clara stayed in the loft until they were dots on the horizon, then climbed down on shaking legs. The rifle slipped from her numb fingers as the reality of what had just happened crashed over her. Jesse caught her as her knees buckled, his good arm strung around her waist. Easy now. You did fine. You did just fine. She was shaking, she realized, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. I almost shot him. I wanted to shoot him. But you didn't. You controlled it, used it. That takes real courage. She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were, how his arm felt around her. They'll be back. Yes, with more men. Probably. You have to leave. Tonight. As soon as it's dark. His jaw tightened. I can't bring more trouble to your door. You're right. But his arm didn't loosen, and she found herself leaning into his warmth. When was the last time someone had held her? Even like this? When was the last time she'd felt protected rather than being the protector? I'm sorry, he said softly. I never meant for any of this to happen. I know. She pulled away reluctantly, wrapping her arms around herself. I should hide those guns. And you need to rest. Save your strength for tonight. They spent the afternoon in tense preparation. Clara hid the bounty hunter's weapons in the root cellar, saddled her old mare for Jesse to take, packed provisions for his journey. He tried to help, but his wound had opened during the fight, and she had to rebandage it. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they sat together in the kitchen, sharing a simple meal. The domesticity of it, two people eating together in the golden light, made Clara's chest ache with longing for things that could never be. Where will you go? She asked. California, maybe, or Oregon, somewhere Morrison's reach doesn't extend. That's a long way. It is. He was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table to cover her hand with his. Clara, what you did today, I won't forget it, ever. His hand was warm, calloused, gentle. She turned her palm up, lacing their fingers together, allowing herself this one moment of connection. I won't forget either, she whispered. Outside, shadows lengthened across the desert. Soon it would be dark enough for him to travel safely. Soon he would ride away and she would be alone again, with only the memory of these strange, intense days to warm her nights. But for now, in the fading light, with their hands joined across her kitchen table, she let herself imagine a different world, one where he could stay, where they could build something together on this unforgiving land. A foolish dream, perhaps, but no more foolish than a lonely widow standing up to armed bounty hunters for a man she barely knew. The first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and Jessie squeezed her hand gently. It's time. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Time for him to go. Time for her to return to her quiet, empty life. But as they stood to prepare for his departure, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed, that the woman who had woken to a sandstorm yesterday was not the same one who would watch him ride away tonight. The wind changed at sunset, bringing with it the smell of snow. Clara stood on her porch, watching the northern horizon where dark clouds massed like an army preparing for siege. Jesse was beside her, leaning against the post, his face drawn with pain and exhaustion. "You can't ride out in this," she said, though she knew her words were futile. "That storm will be here within the hour. Better to face the storm than Pike and his men," he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. The fight in the barn had taken more out of him than he'd admit. Fresh blood had already soaked through the clean bandage she'd applied just hours ago. "You won't make it 5 miles. She turned to face him, abandoning pretense. "Your wound is worse. You know it. I know it. If you try to ride now, you'll be dead by morning. And if I stay, we'll both be dead by morning. Maybe, maybe not." She watched the first snowflakes begin to fall, fat and lazy in the still air. "But at least we'd face it together." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "Clara, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't say whatever noble thing you're about to say. Just come inside. Let's be practical about this." They retreated to the kitchen as the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Clara stoked the fire while Jesse sank into a chair, his face gray with pain. She poured them both coffee, lacing his heavily with whiskey. "This is the second storm in 3 days," she said, watching the snow beginning to accumulate on the windowsill. "Even Pike won't travel in this. We have tonight, at least. And tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll figure out tomorrow." She sat across from him, cradling her cup. "Tell me about California." "What would you do there?" He was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee. "I had this picture in my head, little spread near the coast, where the grass stays green all year, raise horses, maybe run some cattle, build something lasting." He looked up at her. "Foolish dreams for a wanted man. Not foolish, just deferred. That's a kind way of putting it." He shifted, wincing. "What about you? What are your dreams?" "Clara Mitchell." She almost laughed. "Dreams? I'm 31 years old, widowed, childless, trying to scratch a living from 40 acres of stubborn dirt. I don't have dreams anymore. I have survival. That's not living. It's what I have." The words came out sharper than she intended. "We can't all run off to California chasing phantoms. Is that what you think I'm doing? Chasing phantoms? Aren't you?" She stood abruptly, needing distance. "You talk about building something lasting, but you can't stay in one place long enough to drive a fence post. You're running. Jesse, that's not the same as living either." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "You're right. I've been running so long I forgot what it felt like to want to stay." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Clara kept her back to him, watching the snow fall harder now, beginning to blank out the familiar landscape. "The first winter after Thomas died," she said slowly, "I thought I'd go mad from the silence. I talked to the cattle, the chickens, the walls themselves. Anything to hear a voice, even my own. Then somewhere along the way, I stopped talking, stopped feeling, just existed." She turned to face him. "These past 2 days, having you here, even with the danger, I remembered what it felt like to be alive." Jesse stood, moving toward her with careful steps. "Clara!" The wind hit the house like a physical blow, making them both jump. The windows shook in their frames, and somewhere outside, something crashed to the ground. The storm had arrived in earnest. "We should check the animals," Clara said, grateful for the interruption. The moment had been too intense, too full of possibilities she couldn't afford to consider. "I'll go," Jesse offered, but she shook her head. "You can barely stand. I'll go. You keep the fire going." She bundled up in Thomas's old coat and fought her way to the barn. The snow was already ankle-deep and falling so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead. The temperature had plummeted, turning the desert into an alien landscape of white and shadow. The animals were restless but safe. She gave them extra feed and made sure their water wasn't freezing, all the while aware of the empty stall where Jessie had lain just last night. Had it only been last night? It felt like a lifetime ago. When she returned to the house, she found Jessie had pulled his chair close to the stove and was feeding it steadily with wood. He'd also found Thomas's rifle and was cleaning it with practiced movements. "Expecting trouble?" she asked, shaking snow from her coat. "Always." He glanced up at her. "How bad is it out there?" "Bad. We're not going anywhere tonight, and neither is anyone else." She hung up the coat and moved to warm her hands by the stove. "That rifle hasn't been cleaned in 3 years." I noticed. His hands moved surely over the weapon. "Your husband taught you to shoot?" "He did. Said a woman alone out here needed to know how to protect herself." She watched him work, noting the economy of movement, the careful attention to detail. "You've done this before, many times." He set the rifle aside and looked at her. "I wasn't always an outlaw. Served in the cavalry for 5 years after the war. Thought I'd found my place, my purpose. Then I mustered out and learned that knowing how to fight doesn't translate to much in civilian life." "Is that how you ended up working for Morrison?" "Eventually. Tried a lot of things first. Mining, cattle driving. Even tried my hand at farming." He smiled ruefully. "Turns out I'm better with horses than crops." Clara found herself smiling back. "I know the feeling. My vegetables are pitiful, but I can gentle a horse better than most men. I'd like to see that someday." The words slipped out, and his face immediately closed off. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't—" "Stop apologizing." She moved to sit across from him again. "We're here, now, tonight. Let's just be here." The storm raged outside, but inside, a different kind of tension built. They talked as the hours passed, sharing stories, finding unexpected commonalities. Jessie told her about his childhood in Virginia, about losing his family in the war. Clara spoke of her life in St. Louis, of the adventure that had turned to hardship when she'd followed Thomas west. "Do you regret it?" Jessie asked. "Coming out here?" "Sometimes, when the loneliness gets too heavy, when the land fights me at every turn, but then I see a sunset paint the mountains purple, or watch a hawk circle in a sky so blue it hurts. And I think, this is where I belong, for better or worse." "You're stronger than you know." Clara Mitchell. Strong. She tasted the word like something foreign. "That's what everyone says. Clara's so strong. Clara will manage." As if strength is a choice rather than the only option left. Jessie leaned forward, his eyes intense in the firelight. "There's different kinds of strength. There's the kind that endures, that survives no matter what. That's you. But there's also the kind that reaches out, that takes risks, that dares to want more than just survival. That's you too. I saw it when you stood up to Pike, when you took me in despite the danger." That wasn't strength. That was foolishness. Maybe they're the same thing sometimes. The wind howled louder, and the house creaked under the assault. Clara shivered despite the warmth of the stove. Jessie noticed and stood, grimacing slightly. "You're cold. I'll get more wood." "No." She caught his arm as he passed her chair. "You'll tear open that wound again. I'll go." But she didn't move, and neither did he. They stayed frozen like that, her hand on his arm, him looking down at her with an expression that made her heart race. The storm outside seemed to fade, replaced by a different kind of electricity. "Clara," he said, her name a question and a plea. She stood slowly, her hand sliding up his arm to his shoulder, careful of his wound. "I know this is impossible. I know you have to leave. That staying means death for both of us. I know all the reasons why this is wrong. But Jessie, I'm so tired of being cold." He made a sound low in his throat and pulled her against him with his good arm. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and whiskey and something wild, like sage after rain. You deserve better than a broken-down outlaw," he murmured into her hair. "And you deserve better than a barren widow," she replied. "But here we are." He pulled back enough to look at her face, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "You're not barren. You're life itself in this dead land. Don't you know that?" The kiss was inevitable, like the storm, like the sunrise. His lips were gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he was afraid she might shatter. But Clara was done being fragile. She pressed closer, her arms going around his neck, pouring all her loneliness and longing into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Jesse rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "This doesn't change anything," he said roughly. "I still have to leave. Pike will come back." "I know." She didn't move away. "But we have tonight. The storm will keep everyone away. For tonight. Can't we just what? Just be two people who aren't alone." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt something inside her break free. All the careful walls she'd built, all the ice around her heart. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one building between them. When he pulled her toward the bedroom, she went willingly, leaving the rifle and the worries and the world outside behind. Tonight, in the heart of the blizzard, with danger circling like wolves, they would create their own shelter. Tomorrow would come with its harsh realities, but tonight they would live. The wind howled its fury. The snow piled against the windows. But inside the small ranch house, two lonely souls found warmth in each other, burning bright against the cold darkness of the world. The morning sun on fresh snow was blinding, turning the familiar landscape into something from a dream. Clara stood at the kitchen window, wrapped in a quilt, watching the light creep across the white expanse behind her. She could hear Jesse moving carefully, favoring his wounded shoulder as he rebuilt the fire. Neither had spoken much since waking. The intimacy of the night seemed fragile in daylight, like the ice crystals that would melt at the slightest touch. Clara felt changed, fundamentally altered, as if her very bones had been rearranged. The woman who had stood at this window yesterday morning was a stranger to her now. "Coffee?" Jesse's voice was gentle, uncertain. "Please." She didn't turn around, couldn't yet face what she might see in his eyes. Regret? Pity? Or worse, the same raw hope she felt clawing at her chest. He brought her a cup, standing beside her at the window. The snow had drifted high against the barn, and the fence posts were mere bumps in the white landscape. No one would be traveling today. But tomorrow. "Clara, we need to talk about—" "I know." She cut him off, finally meeting his gaze. "You have to leave. Nothing's changed. Everything's changed." His free hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "I can't just ride away now. Not after— After what? After one night?" She pulled her hand away, though it cost her. "That's exactly what you have to do. Pike will come back with more men. The sheriff will get involved. If you stay, we both hang. Then come with me." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's heart stopped, then resumed at double speed. "What?" "Come with me to California. Leave this place. Start fresh. Together." His eyes were fierce with possibility. "You said it yourself. You're just surviving here. We could have more than that. We could live." She wanted to say yes. God, how she wanted it. To ride away from the loneliness, the struggle, the weight of others' judgment. To chase those green pastures and coastal dreams with this man who made her feel alive again. "I can't—" The words scraped her throat raw. "This is my land. Thomas and I built this place with our own hands. I can't just abandon it. It's killing you. It's mine." She set down her coffee cup, hands shaking. "Maybe that doesn't mean much to someone who's been running for months, but it means everything to me. This is where Thomas is buried. This is where we tried to build our dreams. I can't just leave it for Earl Watson to steal." Jesse's jaw tightened. "So you'll stay here and grow old alone? Waste your life on 40 acres of dirt that doesn't even grow decent vegetables?" "Yes." The word came out firm, though her heart was breaking. "If that's what it takes." He turned away, running his good hand through his hair. "You're being stubborn. And you're being foolish. What kind of life could we have? Always looking over our shoulders, always waiting for Pike or someone like him to find us?" She moved closer, unable to help herself. "I won't be the reason you get caught. I won't have your death on my conscience. And I won't have yours on mine." He faced her again, and the anguish in his eyes nearly undid her. "Clara, please, if I leave you here and something happens—" "Nothing will happen. Pike has no quarrel with me. Once you're gone, he'll have no reason to come back." She tried to sound confident, though they both knew she was lying. Men like Pike didn't forget being humiliated by a woman. They were interrupted by the sound of horses. Both froze, then moved quickly to the window. A lone rider was approaching, fighting through the snow-covered trail. As he drew closer, Clara recognized him with a sinking heart. "Sheriff Watson," she said, "Earl's brother." Jesse had already moved to strap on the gun belt they'd taken from Pike. "How many bullets do we have?" "No." Clara put a hand on his arm. "No shooting. Let me handle this." "Clara, trust me, please." She quickly helped Jesse to the root cellar, wincing at how much effort it took him to manage the ladder. His wound had opened again during the night, the bandage showing fresh red. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "No matter what happens? If he threatens you—" "He won't. He's not that kind of man." She hoped she was right. "Just stay hidden." She barely had time to straighten her appearance before the knock came. Sheriff Watson stood on her porch, snow dusting his shoulders, his lined face grave beneath his hat. "Mrs. Mitchell, may I come in?" "Of course, Sheriff." She stepped aside, heart hammering. "Coffee? You must be cold after that ride." "That'd be welcome." He followed her to the kitchen, his sharp eyes taking in everything: the 2 cups on the counter, the rifle by the door, the medical supplies she hadn't had time to put away. She poured coffee with steady hands, playing the gracious widow. "What brings you out in this weather?" "Sheriff. Had some visitors in town yesterday. Bounty hunters, led by a man named Pike. They're claiming you interfered with their lawful pursuit of a fugitive." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? And when did this alleged interference occur?" "Yesterday afternoon. According to them, said you held them at gunpoint, helped a wanted man escape. Yesterday afternoon I was here, tending my stock and preparing for the storm, as I'm sure you noticed. Sheriff, travel would have been quite difficult yesterday." Watson sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim. "That's what I figured. Still, Pike was pretty insistent. Said he'd be filing charges, coming back with more men. Let him come." Clara met his gaze steadily. "I know my rights. A woman alone has the right to defend her property against armed trespassers." "That she does." Watson set down his cup. "Clara, I'm going to speak plain. Earl's been pressuring me about your water rights again. Says a woman alone can't properly manage the land, that it should go to someone who can make better use of it. Your brother has coveted my land since the day Thomas died. I know it, and I've told him to leave you be. But if you get tangled up in this business with Pike, if there's even a whisper of criminal activity—" He spread his hands. "It gives him ammunition, legal grounds to challenge your ownership." Clara felt the walls closing in. "So what are you suggesting, Sheriff?" "I'm suggesting you be very careful. Whatever happened or didn't happen yesterday, make sure it stays that way." He stood, setting his hat back on his head. "I've always respected you. Clara, you're a strong woman, and you've done well by this place. But strength can sometimes look like stubbornness, and stubbornness can lead to poor decisions." "I'll keep that in mind." At the door, Watson paused. "One more thing. If you do happen to come across anyone who shouldn't be here, any strangers seeking shelter, well, sometimes the Christian thing to do is help them on their way. Far away, quickly." Their eyes met, and Clara saw understanding there. "Thank you, Sheriff." After he left, she waited a full 10 minutes before letting Jesse out of the cellar. He emerged pale and shaking. the climb having taxed his strength. "He knows," Jesse said. "He suspects, but Tom Watson is a fair man, unlike his brother. He was warning us." She helped Jesse to a chair. "Pike's been to town. He'll be back, probably tomorrow when the snow's cleared some. Then I leave tonight. You can't ride yet. That wound, I can't stay either." He caught her hands. "You heard what Watson said. My presence here threatens your land, everything you've worked for. I won't be the cause of you losing it all." She wanted to argue, but the truth of his words was undeniable. Every hour he remained increased the danger to both of them, and not just from Pike. Earl Watson would use any excuse to steal her water rights, and harboring a fugitive would give him all the legal standing he needed. "Tonight, then," she agreed, though the words tasted like ashes. "After dark, I'll pack supplies, and you can take the mare. She's not fast, but she's steady. I'll pay you for her." "No." The refusal came out sharp. "You'll not turn last night into a transaction. That's not what I—" He stopped, seeing her face. "All right, thank you." They spent the day in preparation, moving with the careful choreography of people trying not to touch. Clara packed food, ammunition, medical supplies. Jesse cleaned weapons and studied her maps, planning a route that would avoid the main trails. Neither spoke of the night before, though it hung between them like a physical presence. As afternoon faded toward evening, Clara found herself memorizing him, the way he moved, the sound of his voice, the exact shade of his eyes in different lights. Soon, these memories would be all she had to warm her through the long nights ahead. "There's a mining camp about 30 miles southwest," she said, pointing to the map. "Rough place, but they don't ask questions. You could rest there, get supplies." "I know it." His finger traced the route. "From there to Tucson, then west to California." "Will you write?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "It wouldn't be safe, for either of us." "No, of course not." She busied herself wrapping the last of the food. "I was being foolish." "Clara." He moved behind her, not quite touching. "If things were different, but they're not." She turned to face him, forcing a smile. "We had one night. That's more than some people get in a lifetime. Is it enough?" "It has to be." The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered desert in shades of rose and gold. Soon it would be dark enough to travel. Clara felt each moment slipping away like water through her fingers. "I'll saddle the mare," she said, needing action to hold off the tears threatening to fall. In the barn, she took her time with the familiar ritual, brushing the mare's coat, checking her hooves, adjusting the saddle. Jesse joined her, moving stiffly but determined. "She likes to drift left on steep downhills," Clara said, stroking the mare's neck. "And she's scared of snakes, so watch for that. I'll take good care of her." "I know." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "You should go. The moon will be up soon." He moved toward her, then stopped. "Clara, don't." She held up a hand. "Please, just go." For a moment, she thought he would argue. Then he mounted carefully, grimacing as the movement pulled at his wound. The mare danced a little, eager to be moving. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He touched his hat brim in farewell, then rode out into the gathering darkness. Clara stood in the barn doorway, watching until horse and rider disappeared into the shadows. Only then did she allow the tears to fall, silent and steady as the snow that had begun again. Tomorrow, Pike would return. Tomorrow, she would face whatever came with the same strength that had carried her through 3 years of widowhood. But tonight, she grieved for possibilities lost, for dreams that would never be, for the warmth that had briefly filled her cold, empty life. The wind picked up, driving snow through the barn door, and Clara shivered. Already, last night felt like something she had imagined, a fever dream born of loneliness and storm. She closed the barn door and walked back to the house, her footsteps quickly covered by the falling snow. By morning, there would be no trace of Jesse's departure, no evidence he had ever been here at all, except for the ache in her chest and the memory of what it felt like to be truly alive, if only for one night. 2 weeks had passed since Jessie rode away into the snowy darkness. Clara had returned to her routines, feeding cattle, mending fences, fighting the endless battle against the desert's encroachment, but everything felt different now, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis. She found herself looking toward the horizon at odd moments, listening for hoofbeats that never came. Pike had returned 3 days after Jessie left, bringing 5 men this time. They'd torn through her property, searching the barn, the root cellar, even the chicken coop. Clara had stood on her porch with Thomas's rifle, watching them with cold eyes. When they found nothing, Pike had promised he'd be watching her, that any slip would bring the law down on her head. She'd merely nodded, her face revealing nothing of the fear that gnawed at her insides. Now, on a clear morning that promised the first real warmth of approaching spring, Clara was surprised to see a lone rider approaching from the north. Her hand went automatically to the rifle, but she relaxed when she recognized the horse, her own mare, the one Jessie had taken. Her heart leaped, then plummeted. If the mare had returned without him, it could only mean... But as the horse drew closer, she saw there was indeed a rider, slumped forward in the saddle. Jessie. Her feet were moving before her mind caught up, running across the yard as the mare stopped at the gate, whickering softly. "Jessie?" She reached up to steady him, gasping at the blood on his shirt, not just the old wound, but fresh red spreading across his chest. "Oh God, what happened?" He lifted his head with effort, and she was shocked at how gaunt he looked, how his eyes burned with fever. "Clara, I tried to stay away." She helped him down, nearly buckling under his weight. He was burning up, his skin dry and hot. Together they stumbled to the house, Jessie leaning heavily on her, his breathing ragged. "Pike?" she asked as she got him to the bed. "No, different bounty hunters, near Tucson." His words came in gasps. "Thought I'd lost them. Guess not." She cut away his shirt, revealing 2 bullet wounds, one in his chest, another in his side. Both were infected, angry red spreading out from the holes. How he'd managed to ride this far in his condition was beyond her. "Why did you come back?" she asked, working quickly to clean the wounds. "You should have found a doctor." "No doctor would treat me, not with a bounty on my head." He caught her hand weakly. "Besides, had to see you again, had to tell you..." "Shh! Save your strength." She mixed a poultice from the herbs the Mexican curandera had taught her to use, praying it would be enough. "You're safe now. I won't let anyone take you." For 3 days, she fought for his life. The fever raged, and he slipped in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for her, sometimes for people she didn't know. She bathed him with cool water, forced willow bark tea between his lips, changed his bandages every few hours. She slept in snatches, jerking awake at every sound, terrified it would be Pike or the sheriff or death itself coming to claim him. On the 3rd night, the fever broke. Clara woke from a doze to find Jessie watching her, his eyes clear for the first time since he'd returned. "You're still here," he whispered. "Where else would I be?" She felt his forehead, cool. Finally. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle, but alive." He tried to sit up, winced, and lay back. "Clara, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come back. I'm putting you in danger again. You were dying. Where else could you go?" "Anywhere but here. You don't understand. Morrison's increased the bounty. $800 now. Every bounty hunter in the territory will be looking for me." "Then we'll face them." She stood, stretching her cramped muscles. "But first, you need food. Real food, not just tea and broth." As she prepared a simple meal, Clara made a decision. She couldn't keep running from this. Couldn't keep pretending that Jessie would simply heal and ride away again. The truth was, she didn't want him to leave. These past 3 days, fighting for his life, had shown her something she'd been trying to deny. She loved him. It was foolish and dangerous and impossible, but it was also true. When she returned with the food, She found him attempting to get out of bed. "What do you think you're doing?" "I need to leave. Every hour I stay, you can barely stand." She set the tray down firmly. "You're not going anywhere until those wounds heal properly." "Clara, no." She sat on the edge of the bed, meeting his eyes. "I'm done with this. Done with pretending that what happened between us meant nothing. Done with letting fear dictate our lives." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to stop running and face this. Morrison wants you to stand trial. Then let's give him a trial, but a real one, with lawyers and witnesses and truth." Jessie stared at her. "You want me to turn myself in? I want you to fight, not with guns, but with the law. Sheriff Watson is a fair man. Judge Harper in the county seat is known for his integrity. If we present your case properly—" "Clara, you don't understand how these things work. Morrison owns half the territory. He'll buy whatever verdict he wants. Maybe in Tucson, but not here. Not in Whisper Creek." She took his hand. "Jessie, you can't run forever, and I can't let you go again. Not when there might be another way." He was quiet for a long moment, studying their joined hands. "Even if what you're suggesting were possible, I couldn't ask you to stand with me. Your reputation—" "My reputation?" She laughed, short and bitter. "I'm already the barren widow who can't fulfill a woman's purpose. What's adding defender of outlaws to the list? Don't say that about yourself. It's what they all think." She squeezed his hand. "But I don't care anymore. Let them talk. I know who I am, and I know what's right. You're innocent of what Morrison accused you of. That's the truth, and truth should matter." Jessie pulled her down beside him, wincing at the movement but not letting go. "You're proposing we take on one of the most powerful men in the territory with nothing but truth on our side? Truth and stubbornness. I've got plenty of both. I've noticed." He touched her face gently. "You realize if we fail, we'll both hang. Then we'd better not fail." They spent the next week planning while Jessie recovered. Clara rode to town, ostensibly for supplies, but really to sound out potential allies. She found more support than expected. Several ranchers had their own grievances against Morrison's heavy-handed tactics. And even Martha Hutchinson admitted that Morrison fellow seems a mite too fond of getting his own way. Most importantly, she secured a meeting with Judge Samuel Harper, the circuit judge who would oversee any trial. He was an older man, silver-haired and serious, with a reputation for fairness that even Morrison's money hadn't been able to tarnish. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, studying her over his spectacles, "I've heard some disturbing rumors about activities at your ranch." "Your Honor, I've come to discuss justice, not rumors." She sat straight in her chair, hands folded. "What would you say if I told you an innocent man was being hunted for crimes he didn't commit, all because he refused to let a powerful rancher's daughter compromise herself?" "I would say that's a serious accusation requiring proof. And if I could provide witnesses, character testimonials, evidence that the original trial was corrupted." Judge Harper leaned back, fingers steepled. "Then I would say justice demands a fair hearing. But Mrs. Mitchell, if you're sheltering a fugitive, hypothetically speaking, Your Honor, but if such a man were to turn himself in, requesting a new trial based on new evidence, would he receive fair treatment? In my court? Yes, but I can't speak for what might happen between surrender and trial." Clara nodded. It was the best she could hope for. "Thank you, Your Honor. You've given me much to think about." She returned home to find Jessie out of bed, moving carefully but determinedly around the kitchen. He'd shaved and washed, and despite his pallor, looked more like the man who'd first collapsed by her well. "You shouldn't be up yet," she scolded. "I've spent enough time in bed. Besides, I wanted to make dinner for you for a change." He gestured to the stove where something was simmering. "It's not much, but it smells wonderful." She moved closer, inhaling the aroma of stew. "I didn't know you could cook." "Army teaches you many skills." He stirred the pot, then looked at her. "How was town?" She told him about Judge Harper, about the support she'd found among the other ranchers. Tom Watson's willing to guarantee your safety until trial, and Reverend Mills says he'll speak as a character witness. Apparently you helped repair his church in Tucson 2 years ago." "I remember. Good man." Jesse was quiet for a moment. "You've been busy. I told you I was done running." She moved beside him, slipping her arm around his waist carefully. "We're going to fight this, Jesse. Together." He set down the spoon and turned to embrace her properly. "I don't deserve you. Clara Mitchell, probably not." She agreed, smiling up at him. "But you're stuck with me anyway." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, full of promise rather than farewell. When they parted, his eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "All right," he said. "We'll do it your way. I'll turn myself in, stand trial again. But Clara, if things go wrong, they won't." She said it with more confidence than she felt. "We have truth on our side, remember? And I'm very stubborn." "That you are." He kissed her forehead. "God help us both, that you are." They ate dinner together as the sun set, planning their next moves. Tomorrow. Jesse would ride to town with Clara and surrender to Sheriff Watson. The wheels of justice would begin turning. Slow, but hopefully sure. It was a gamble, possibly a fatal one. But as Clara watched Jesse's face in the lamplight, saw the relief at finally choosing to stand and fight rather than run, she knew it was the right choice. The world had branded him an outlaw and her a barren woman of no consequence. Tomorrow, they would begin proving the world wrong. Spring had come to the Arizona territory in earnest, painting the desert with unexpected colors. Purple lupines and golden poppies carpeted the spaces between cacti, and the air carried the sweet scent of blooming Palo Verde trees. Clara stood outside the courthouse in the county seat, her best dress pressed and her head held high despite the whispers that followed her like tumbleweeds. The trial had lasted 3 days, 3 days of testimony, accusations, and revelations that had set the whole territory talking. Jesse sat beside his lawyer, a young man from Phoenix who'd taken the case for the challenge of it, looking dignified despite the shackles on his wrists. The courtroom was packed, folk having come from miles around to witness the spectacle. Morrison had arrived on the second day, his presence filling the room like a thundercloud. He was everything Clara had expected. Tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of a man used to getting his way. His daughter Elizabeth had come too, a pretty blonde thing who kept her eyes downcast and her hands folded. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor had said when Elizabeth took the stand. "Elizabeth Morrison Whitman," she'd replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Whitman, do you know the defendant?" "I do." What followed had stunned even Clara. Under gentle questioning from Jesse's lawyer, Elizabeth had finally told the truth. How she'd pursued Jesse despite his attempts to maintain propriety. How her father had flown into a rage when he'd found them talking. How she'd been forced to remain silent during the first trial. "He never touched me improperly," she'd said, finally looking at Jesse. "He was always a gentleman. My father wanted me to marry Charles Whitman for business reasons. When I showed interest in Mr. Calhoun instead—" "You're lying," Morrison had roared, jumping to his feet. "That man corrupted you, turned you against your family." Judge Harper's gavel had rung out sharp. "Mr. Morrison, you'll remain silent or be removed from my courtroom." The truth had continued to spill out. The foreman who'd testified about the stolen horse had recanted, admitting Morrison had paid him to lie. 2 ranch hands came forward with stories of Morrison's other schemes, other lives ruined by his greed and pride. Through it all, Jesse had sat quietly, dignified in his suffering. When he'd finally taken the stand himself, his testimony had been simple and direct. He'd told his story without embellishment, admitting his mistakes while maintaining his innocence of the charges against him. "I ran," he'd said, looking directly at the jury. "I'm not proud of it, but I'd seen what Morrison's money could do to justice. I didn't think I'd get a fair trial. It took a very brave woman to show me that running wasn't living, that sometimes you have to stand and fight for truth." His eyes had found Clara's in the gallery, and the look they'd shared had set tongues wagging anew. Now, waiting for the verdict. Clara paced the courthouse steps. The jury had been deliberating for 2 hours. Jesse's lawyer said that was a good sign. They were taking it seriously, not just rubber-stamping Morrison's wishes. Clara, she turned to find Sheriff Watson approaching, his expression unreadable. Tom, she nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. Any word? Jury's coming back in. Her heart leaped into her throat. She followed him back into the courthouse, taking her seat just as Judge Harper called for order. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a weathered rancher named Hayes, stood. We have, Your Honor, in the matter of Territory versus Jesse Calhoun, on the charge of horse theft. How do you find? Not guilty, Your Honor. The courtroom erupted. Morrison surged to his feet, shouting about corruption and bought justice. Elizabeth Whitman burst into tears. And Jesse closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging with relief. Order! Judge Harper's gavel crashed down repeatedly. Mr. Morrison, sit down or I'll have you arrested for contempt. Mr. Calhoun, please rise. Jesse stood, and Clara could see his hands trembling slightly. Mr. Calhoun, this jury has found you not guilty of the charges against you. The bounty on your head is hereby vacated, and you are free to go. However, the judge's expression was stern. You fled justice, sir. While I understand your reasons, it sets a poor precedent. You'll pay a fine of $50 and serve 30 days in the county jail. Your Honor. Jesse's lawyer started to protest, but Jesse put a hand on his arm. That's fair, Your Honor. I accept your judgment. As the deputies prepared to take Jesse to serve his sentence, he was allowed a moment with Clara. They stood in the corner of the courtroom, aware of all the eyes on them, but not caring. 30 days, she said softly. I can manage 30 days. Clara, he took her hands, shackles clinking. What you did, standing by me, fighting for me, I can never repay that. I don't want repayment. She squeezed his hands. I want a future, our future. You'll have it, he promised. When I get out, if you'll have me, Clara Mitchell. Will you marry me? The courtroom, already buzzing with gossip, went silent at his words. Clara felt every eye on her, including Morrison's hate-filled glare, but she didn't care. The woman who had once shrunk from the town's whispers now stood tall in the spotlight. Yes, she said clearly, so everyone could hear. Yes, Jesse Calhoun, I'll marry you. The courthouse erupted again, this time with a mixture of scandalized gasps and delighted exclamations. Even Judge Harper had to hide a smile behind his hand. As the deputies led Jesse away to begin his sentence, Clara walked out with her head high. Let them talk. Let them whisper about the barren widow and the reformed outlaw. She had fought for love and justice and won. That was worth more than all the gossip in the territory. 1 month later, on a perfect May morning, Clara stood in her ranch yard wearing her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her sun-strengthened frame. Jesse waited by the gate, clean-shaven and dressed in a new suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked toward him. The wedding was small. Sheriff Watson stood as Jesse's best man, while Martha Hutchinson, won over by the romance of it all, served as Clara's matron of honor. Reverend Mills performed the ceremony, his voice carrying across the desert. Do you, Jesse, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Jesse said, his voice strong and sure. Do you, Clara, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Clara said, tears threatening despite her best efforts. Then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was tender, full of promise and hard-won joy. Around them, the small gathering applauded, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried its celebration to the endless sky. Later, as the sun set over the mountains, Clara and Jesse sat on their porch now, watching the light paint the desert in shades of gold and purple. No regrets? Jesse asked, his arm around her shoulders. None, Clara said firmly. You? Only that it took me so long to stop running. He kissed her temple. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. This ranch won't run itself. No, it won't. She smiled. Good thing I've got help now. They sat in comfortable silence. Two souls who had found each other against all odds. The desert stretched out before them, harsh and beautiful, challenging and full of possibility. Clara placed a hand on her stomach, where she'd recently begun to suspect new life might be growing. She hadn't told Jesse yet, wanted to be sure first, but the signs were there. The changes in her body that spoke of hope fulfilled. She had heat but no air. The townspeople had whispered, but Clara had never lacked heat, only someone to share it with, someone who saw her as more than her ability or inability to bear children. Now she had that someone, and perhaps, God willing, she would have more. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and Jesse pulled her closer. What are you thinking about? The future, she said. Our future. And what does it look like? Clara smiled, thinking of all the possibilities stretching out before them like the vast desert. Dangerous. Yes, but also beautiful and full of promise. It looks like home, she said simply. And in Jesse's arms, with their hard-won happiness wrapped around them like a blanket, it was, "Thank you for joining us around the campfire for this Wild West love story. We'd love to hear where you're listening from, whether it's on a long drive through the desert, cozy in your home, or perhaps even somewhere in the American West where these tales came to life. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts about Clara and Jesse's journey in the comments below. Until next time, partners, keep that frontier spirit alive.